Holy, lions don't do this. Lions never had a lair like this. They're doing it for the pleasure.
They are not lions. They are the ghost and the darkness.
Hello, and welcome to episode 16 of We'll Review It Ourselves, the podcast where we review the movies on our shelves. Every 2 weeks, we'll take a randomly selected movie from our collection, and we'll review it ourselves. I'm Brian Morgan, and joining me on this journey is...
Dan Bergman.
Yay!
And there was much rejoicing.
Yay! And they were forced to eat Robin's minstrels. Yay! Very nice. I would like to inform our listening fandom that we are changing our format just a little bit. We're going to do listener comments at the beginning of the podcast because it addresses the previous episode, so that way we have this sort of natural flow and we can just talk about the movie that we're going to talk about the entire time. But I do have one, we'll call it a correction to make. On our last episode, The Heat, we referred to this movie as Ghost and the Darkness, and the actual title of the movie is The Ghost and the Darkness. So once again, we are stymied by specific articles.
Picky.
Yes, well, somebody sat down and wrote these words in that sequence to make a title, and I thought it was worth mentioning.
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree. I'm just making jokes.
All right, so to our listener feedback, we did get some feedback on episode 15. I'm not going to read all of the traffic that was on the Facebook page. There was a lot of it, and it was, strangely enough, not about the movie Heat. So suffice it to say, take a visit to our Facebook page. It's https://www.facebook.com/WRIOSMR, and you can see the conversation that took place between Dan and one of our listeners. I got involved as well, but a lot of the conversation was predicated on our discussion of The Heat and any relationship that it might have to the movie Seven. So, and the reason I'm not reading all of the comments is I don't want to go down that rabbit hole of discussing Seven before we actually get to Seven. So suffice it to say, based on the interaction, I do believe that we will find when we get to that movie that Dan and I hold slightly different opinions on the movie, but it'll be an interesting conversation. So there you go. Visit the Facebook page. And before we get to that wrap-up thing at the end there, share it with people so we can get more listeners and more listener feedback. All right. As mentioned before, the movie for episode 16 is The Ghost and the Darkness, because we apparently do like those parts of speech that are very particular to a thing. One of the things that we did do a little bit differently on this episode, both Dan and I read The Man-Eaters of Tsavo, the book that this movie is inspired by. Yep. And we're going to talk a little bit about the differences between the movie and the book and some of the finer parts of creative liberties, I think. So, Dan, I don't own this movie, so how it got on my shelf is a very short story of me clicking the Amazon Prime button on my remote control and searching for this movie and finding out that I didn't actually have to rent it, that it was available through Amazon Prime Video. So that's how it got at least near my shelf. How did it get on your shelf, Dan?
Well, I just absolutely love this. This is one of those movies that was love at first sight, and I have to say, going back to its history, I think, in my opinion, when it first came out, it was very poorly marketed because I just remember the commercials to me were quite unimpressive. The trailer that I saw in a movie theater for it just kind of like, okay, looks like another cheesy horror movie or whatever. It's just it didn't impress upon me that I needed to see this film in theaters. So I kind of let it slip by me in that part of its history. It wasn't until, I don't know if it was out of curiosity or somebody just happened to mention it, but I walked into Blockbuster or Hollywood Video and saw it on the shelf.
What is that, Dan?
Oh, these wonderful shrines of the past,
It's like a walk-in Redbox.
Basically, yeah, that's a good description. I have to remember that one. But I saw it on the shelf, and I said, you know what? Let's give it its day in court. Took it home, watched it, and kind of had that moment of, why did I miss this? This movie's awesome. And I had heard, that it was kind of based on a true story, but knew nothing about the story that it was based upon. But I learned and read about it, and yeah, it's, like I said, to me, it's a movie that doesn't get enough credit that it deserves.
Okay. Well, don't spoil the ending. So, when I say don't spoil the ending, don't spoil where it ranks on your shelf. Because it sounds like it might not be in general population. I'm just throwing that out there.
What a twist.
Oh, no, it is not in general population. So, since this is your movie, I'm going to throw this out here to you as giving you the first opportunity to speak of, well, whatever you want to speak of. What's the first thing you want to talk about this movie?
Well, the first thing is, just I want to give it the accolades I think it really deserves. Again, it's just one of those movies that it was marketed as, being based on a true story. And, a lot of movies, when we talk about creative liberties and they say based on a true story, the execution is less than, truth. I mean, if it was admitted in a court of law as evidence, the case would be thrown out with a lot of movies.
It does not stand up. Overruled.
I mean, as like an example, that Braveheart was supposedly based on a true story, but the year that it supposedly takes place in, it's like it was, and forgive me for not knowing the exact numbers correctly, but it was something like 1308 that something takes place, but they just said no in 1300, and they're like, what? The movie couldn't afford an 8?
Not even an 8, just a line, sort of a line to cross between the middle there.
And then, it's like you have their writer saying, well, I wasn't trying to make historical accuracy, I was trying to tell a story. And I was like, well, if you want to tell a story, then tell a story, but don't tell me it's a true story. So, that being said, this one, yeah, they said based on true story, and I think they said the catch line, it's like, only the most incredible parts of the story are true.
Which is actually in the book.
Yeah.
In the foreword for the version that I read, it said exactly that. So they drew that from the book, so good on them.
Yeah, and so I gotta say, for the most part, I think they've actually lived up to that claim. Like you said, there are some creative liberties. There was a creation of a character,
and the subtraction of many others.
And the subtraction. So I mean, yeah, I guess the creation of the characters, you could say he's an amalgam of the other.
I don't even think he's an amalgam. He is a totally new character that really, I don't think he needed to be there. There was no reason for... And the character we're talking about for our listeners is Michael Douglas's character. In the book, Remington does not exist. And the book addresses how Colonel Patterson deals with the workmen to build the railroad, and how he deals with the lions, the man-eaters of Savo, that are terrorizing his workers. And there is no character like Remington ever. There's a couple of guys that he goes hunting with, but he is always the more seasoned, experienced hunter, and it's as though he sprung forth from the head of Zeus as this totally separate entity, and now we have to deal with this character. So I'm just going to say right up front, I did not care for Michael Douglas's character because I didn't think he needed to be there based on what I'd read in the book. I think that was too much of a creative liberty.
And I don't entirely disagree with you on that, about him being unnecessary as far as telling the story. And that's one of the problems I have with Hollywood, is that there's so many incredible stories that are true that they don't need to change, but they change anyways. I mean, the Titanic was an incredible event with some incredible stories. Did they really need to have Jack and Rose in there?
And that you bring up an interesting point, because the Titanic was a historical event. They had some real-life historical characters, the unsinkable Molly Brown, the tales of the band playing while the ship sunk. But to make the sinking of a ship interesting, you have to invest us in the characters. You have to give us a reason to follow the events so that you can get there. I think that James Cameron did a great job of putting a story together. The fact that Jack could have fit on the door notwithstanding, he gave us a character arc that kept us motivated and wanted to go on the journey, both literally and figuratively, that was Titanic. And it even went to the point where you came back to Titanic to show the cool footage of the underwater vehicles careening through the wreckage. So in some cases, it's perfectly okay to create a story around an event when the event itself, while fascinating, would just make for a great documentary.
Okay, but the thing I got to say to that is, like, one, again, I don't disagree with you on this or anything. I think
that Jack would have fit on the door?
No. That we've discussed this before, that, as great as movies can be, whether historical or fictional or whatever, we still have to understand that they are vehicles to turn a buck. They're made for profit and everything. So yes, I get it. Hollywood has to make things interesting for its audiences. There's marketing involved. There's money. There's executives that are not necessarily experts, but they say, hey, I think this will make money. Do it this way. Not the most desirable, but hey, if it turns a buck, they've done their job. I get that. On the flip side of that coin, or as I like to put, another facet on that diamond, I feel that you did not have to create fictional characters to make the story interesting. I mean, again, you mentioned Molly Brown. She led an extraordinary life. They showed a few pictures to show that Rose led an extraordinary life. Well, Molly Brown led an extraordinary life, and that really did happen. And I think you could make a story revolving around her, possibly her descendants, to make a connection between modern day and the past, and, stay true to historical events. And again, like I said, it's a balance. I get it. It's Hollywood. But at the same time, it'd be nice if things were a little bit more historically accurate without the need to say, oh, we're just going to make these fictional characters to make it interesting.
I don't disagree with you. Again, it depends on how well you craft the story around the characters that you're trying to suck me into this event with.
Yeah. And that's where we come to Remington. And again, I agree with you. He wasn't necessary. The story was amazing enough without him. Like I say, if you read, anybody who's read the book will agree to that. But understanding what Hollywood does, you add a character that you could possibly relate to. Of course he had to be American. Of course he had to be sympathetic because he lost his family in the American Civil War, as implied in a conversation within the movie. So it's like, oh, yes, okay, I can relate to that because we're Americans. USA, I totally get that. It's forgivable because at least they did a decent job of making him, and in my opinion, a relatively likable character.
He was likable, I'll give you that.
Yeah, he was skilled, he was direct, he got things done, and he had a pretty decent sense of humor. I especially love the part, where he says that, when they talk about what he's going to do, and he says, Patterson, this is going to be all you because I still, I can leave, but your men still have to respect you. And he goes to say, wow, that's very big of you. And he says, my mother taught me that. And the guy, the foreman laughs, and he's like, what, you don't think my mother taught me that? It's like, I doubt you had a mother, And that was one of the better, that was a great scene. I love that. That was a great bonding scene.
And that was one of the things that was lacking in the book, was a little bit of humor. The parts where the character laughed in the book were usually based on the misfortunes of someone else, which, I mean, we laugh at other people's falls, but, it wasn't mean-spirited, it was just of the time. There was sort of a sense of we don't have time to sit around telling jokes, so, we're going to laugh when we can. But Michael Douglas's character, I liked him, he was affable enough. I think that he was put in the movie I don't know, but probably because Michael Douglas was the executive producer and said, I'm going to be in this movie. I think they could have found another part for him from someone that actually existed, because they added a whole bunch of other characters as well. It's just that Michael Douglas is the biggest one that makes an impact. In the book, there was no discussion of being hired on by the railroad to finish this bridge project over the river, and there was no mention of a wife or, well, a pregnant wife and a future son. None of that was in the book. It was just the guy was going down to build the bridge. So from that standpoint, I can understand them giving him a little bit of a backstory and a little bit more purpose to building the bridge, other than just being the guy that was hired to build the bridge because he was, pretty good at it. I think they could have made an interesting movie without those characters and made it a little more suspenseful with just the hunting of the lions and taking out the boss and the wife and the Michael Douglas character, and focused more on just the hunt and the terror that these lions caused. Because in the book, that went on for a couple of months, and I didn't get that feeling from the movie. It really was, there was an attack, he killed a couple of people, the lion, and then it was like, oh, well, I'm going to kill the lion. And he killed the first lion, and then there were two more, and every mention of time passing was, oh, yep, there's 20 dead. Oh, now there's 30 dead. Oh, now there's 40 dead. And you never got the feel that this had been going on for some time, and it was just a matter of shifting to, well, now we got to kill some lions.
I don't know. I don't know if I can fully agree with that, because I mean, it was a lot of show me of the passage of time, and you saw the progression of the bridge as time went by. And that kind of gave you an indication that, oh yeah, I mean, these are not erector sets. This is the age when things had to be put together piece by piece, and
yeah, by hand. I mean, the guys lugging the iron
railroad tracks.
It wasn't even a railroad track. It was just a structure for the bridge.
Yeah,
the girders, and that was pretty awesome. I liked that. That was definitely, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit later, but historically accurate, at least from what I understand. It was 40 guys, and one of them was pretty young. It looked like just a kid at the lead going, just trying to maintain his breath and get that thing out there so they could put it into place. And there is a certain romanticization of that building the world by hand, of not having cranes and bulldozers and backhoes and all that cool stuff that we have now. They shucked these things into the ground with their hands, and that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that was I'd say the portrayal of that was very spot on. I've mentioned him before. There's a YouTuber by the name of Nick Hodges, and his channel is called History Buffs. And I think I've mentioned it before. He doesn't discuss whether a movie is good or not. He just talks about the historical accuracy of it, and in his opinion, makes a movie good, as if it is. He gave this a very high score when it comes to historical accuracy, and the portrayal of the manual labor, the construction of the railroad and the bridge is something that he highlighted. And I think it's something I admired a lot in this movie, was just to see that, the spectacle of it.
But one of the things that was in the book that wasn't in the movie that I think would have set the scene a little more true to the era, there was no one given the whip. There was no one punished for the good of the whole, if you will. In the book, there are some things that happen that require Colonel Patterson to be a stern leader. In the book, he's pretty, in his opinion, again, because it's written from his point of view, he's pretty nice to his workers, one of the better employees of the day. But there are still moments when he has to mete out justice, because in the same way when we were in the Navy, he was the commanding officer, if you will, and because he was working independently, he also had to be the person, the judge, and the jury and mete out punishment. I think, again, going to establishing a depth of character without Michael Douglas, you could fill in that time with him being a little more fleshed out in his humanity. About the only humanity we really get that's deep and biting is when he's writing the letter to his wife, saying that because he hasn't killed the lions yet, that the deaths of his men are his fault. And then he crumples it up, and then we move on to something else. It was an emotional moment, and I know what the movie makers, were trying to get out of it. That he's torn up by this, but it seemed like it was just sort of a moment in time, and he got over it. It didn't seem to me that Colonel Patterson, Val Kilmer's character, really felt the prolonged effects of having the men in his charge die.
Okay.
I mean, I know I'm getting on about this movie, but it goes to that common thing that I think a lot of us notice, and listeners, again, write in and let us know if you disagree, but there is a phenomenal difference between watching a movie and then watching a movie after reading the book and visualizing sometimes in your head the way that you would do things or the way that you would change things. Again, you can't tell the whole story of the book when you spend a quarter of a page describing the contents of a table. You can take a full second with a camera, really, and show everything that the author just painstakingly described. So that stuff's pretty simple, but the parts of the book where you have to describe the motivations of the character, you can't always do that with just a camera look. Sometimes you can if the actor's face can portray it, but you have to do that with more dialogue generally. And I didn't really feel that because, again, the book, the way the author read it, and this movie only really cuts up about a third of the book, because the Man-Eaters of Tsavo was the first section, and there were 2 or 3 sections after that were just building the bridge and handling employee disputes and having to deal with the flora and fauna of Eastern Africa, which in the late 1800s, early 1900s was, raw and untamed, and it's kind of amazing that they got this stuff done, but it shows that sheer stubbornness of mankind to conquer their environment. What do you think?
I don't really know how to respond to that. You kind of, no offense, but you kind of went on and everything. Didn't really leave it open for me to respond.
I mean, you've read the book, so what did you think about the missing sections? Do you think they could have fleshed out the movie more? Again, talking about Michael Douglas's character, because we could have taken that out, that would leave you a lot more room for scenes to build the environment.
Well, to begin, I guess I'm just gonna respond to your thing about the difference between reading a book and watching a movie. For me, I find it's better for me to watch a movie first before I read the book. I like to do both. I enjoy reading books. I enjoy watching movies. But if I'm going to watch something that's related to a book, I'd rather watch the movie first, because I find I enjoy both more in that order, if I were to experience them in that order. That being said, I understand that they're two entirely different mediums to express an art. And like you said, a movie maker just has to show a table, whereas an author has to painstakingly spend a few pages describing it if it's important.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if a table's not important in either book or movie, neither are going to waste ink or film on either.
Sure.
But again, there's a time and a place for everything, and it's not just because the author decides he's going to painstakingly describe a table in a book doesn't necessarily mean the filmmaker has to at least show it. He may not have to show it at all. If the author chooses to describe a table because that's how he is, but ultimately it doesn't do anything to advance the story or enhance the story, then why should a filmmaker feel that, you know, he should, if he can tell the story visually without it, then he's going to do so. So that being said, I think the movie did enough to show the spectacle, the intensity of the railroad construction, the drive, what it took to do. You know, just like I said, the short scenes where you see the laborers huffing and puffing, carrying a girder by hand using raw muscle. I think that said it all. I mean, you didn't have to describe every last detail of building the railroad. All the movie had to do, because it only has a couple hours, if that much, to tell the story.
Well, it was made in the 90s when we only had 2-hour movies, not, 2.5, 3-hour extravaganzas.
Yeah, so, I mean, again, you don't have to go through this whole long chapter. You don't have to use an entire act just to show us how much labor and blood, sweat, and tears went into building this railroad. With a few camera pans, a few shots of labor, sweating, and huffing and puffing, told me enough. When I read the book, I was like, yeah, it was hard. And the book goes into more detail. The movie, I felt, did not have to. And it didn't diminish the movie in any way, I think, because they did not. I think the main draw was the lions and the hunt and the problems these lions caused. That's what the movie set out to do. And it did it. I think it did it well.
To the lions, there were some changes?
Technicalities.
That I did not find terribly important in the movie. There's a scene in the movie where Val Kilmer and Michael Douglas are tracking the lion, or they stumble across the lion's den, and they find the bones of maybe 100 men. And they both make a statement about, I've never seen lions this
I've never seen lions
before.
Yeah.
I've never seen lions do this before. I understand, again, what they were trying to say is these are not ordinary lions, but the book does a much better job of showing how the lions avoid the traps and how much time Val Kilmer's character spent trying to predict where the lions would be based on their movements. I think they could have done a little bit more with exploring that aspect of it and the terror that the lions caused, more than just, now we're going to hunt. Otherwise, it's just a hunt to capture these 2 lions that have scared your workers off, whereas the book does a great job of showing how much terror this actually caused. Aside from the workers leaving, I felt like in the movie that it was kind of glossed over. They showed one major attack, and then there was the one time when Val Kilmer had to keep the workers there, and then the next time they left. And in the book, now I'm going to say I remember reading it and then watching the movie, so I might be intermixing the two, but I don't recall that they ever actually all left. He was down to a skeleton crew to, cook the food and basically do a little bit of stuff, but progress was significantly slowed and they didn't all leave.
They did kind of show that in the movie. Again, it wasn't a focus on it, but when they showed everybody leaving, they focused on Abdullah, who was the worker who was kind of rallying the people against Val Kilmer.
He was the dirty union leader.
Yeah, he was the one that said that was always for front and center when it came to the protest about how Patterson was failing the workers and letting these people die. And it says, "Oh yeah, you can do anything. You're white." Which is a nice little sum up of the sentiment.
Well, especially given the era of colonialism. I mean, it was speaking of British colonialism, and they'd just gone in and colonized India, and now they were moving into Africa, and Africa was being carved up by everybody, every European country. Germany had a little bit, France had a little bit, Britain had a little bit.
Yeah.
That was expressing the frustrations of the people who were being colonized.
Yeah. So Anyways, it kind of go back to that scene though. It's when everybody was leaving. Again, it was this is the filmmaker not feeling that he had to spend too much time on it. When you saw the train, yeah, the majority of the workers were on the train leaving, but as the camera panned back to Patterson, you still saw some workers in the background. Not everybody left. There were still some people that kind of stuck around, and I may have missed that detail. Yeah, and I felt you didn't have to go into detail. It's like, oh, Bob here, he just stuck it around because where else was he going to go,
Yeah, Bob's wife left him. Yeah. Bob's wife was eaten by lions.
Yeah, he figured lion, wife, what's the difference?
Again, the things I wanted, the things I wanted to see in the movie were not so much the ferocity of the lions, like when they went into the den, but in the book they talked about. Or was this our conversation? Again, I may be wrong here, but they spoke of the slave trade and how they were not using slaves so much, and that they were, that the lions. Hold on. They were discussing the slave trade, and if I recall correctly from the book, I think they used that piece as part of the reason why the lions had developed a taste for human flesh, because when you're herding slaves from point A to point B to do whatever you're going to do with them, if they fall ill or become injured, you're not going to do anything with them if it's not recoverable, so you're just going to leave them there, and what's out there? Lions. Yeah, so
that is an aspect of the book that maybe I think that could have been added to the movie that would have explained things a little more, because
gotten rid of Michael Douglas.
Well, no, you didn't have to do that, but yeah, you just kind of accepted that these lions were man-eaters. For someone like me, you perhaps, or anything, it was like, why were they this way if they've never done this, especially in that scene, the den scene that you say wasn't necessary. I halfway agree with you, but again, this is Hollywood. You had to show just a little bit more to make the audience see that, these lions are not normal.
Oh, it was like a dragon's lair.
Kinda, yeah.
Had there been a pile of gold. I don't know why I did that in a Scottish accent, but...
I don't know either. But, it would have been nice to show that, the slave trade was the reason why you had these lions acting the way that they did. But, suspension of disbelief or just accepting it or whatever, lions were man-eaters.
And I don't think there's any suspension of disbelief that the lions were man-eaters. I don't think that was an issue, because most people tend to think that lions eat people. I don't think anybody outside of a lion tamer or someone who is actively hunting a lion wants to go walk up to a lion and find out if they're going to get eaten or not. They're like, oh, yeah, that's got big, huge, nasty teeth, and it's probably going to eat me because they eat meat and I'm meat. Who knew? And I'm slower, so, by the way, I don't have to outrun the lion, I just have to outrun you.
Mm-hmm.
But the genuine taste for human flesh that they had could have been so much easier explained by a couple of lines of dialogue about the slave trade, and it really would have set the scene for the era a little bit more and fleshed it out. Again, that's why I don't think they needed the den scene, even leaving Michael Douglas's character in there. And I'm not anti-Michael Douglas. I'm really not. I liked the story in the book so much more when it was a skilled hunter trying to take down beasts he'd never hunted before. And they kind of captured that in the movie, but Colonel Patterson, Val Kilmer's character, was a much more experienced hunter in the book than I believe he was portrayed in the movie. And by the way, Val Kilmer's Irish accent, not so good.
Yeah, that could have, they could have done without that. That's all I'm going to say about that. Yeah, the other thing I like to bring up on this movie too, again, to go back to the tagline of only the most incredible parts of the story being true, I was pleasantly surprised that some of the scenes that you think were, they just added that because it looks cool and everything. And I speak specifically of the scene with the boxcar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, his contraption.
His trap that he said he used on tigers, and how a lion did get in there. The trap was sprung, and the three men who were 10 feet away from it couldn't hit it, and that one of their bullets actually helped to set it free. And that is recorded. It did happen. Although the men who were in the boxcar, the hunters that were supposed to shoot the lion, I believe they were different types of people.
I think they were just coolies. They were just people on the work gang.
Yeah, and in the movie he said that they were like bandits or something, or hired thugs, basically.
Yeah, bandits and robbers.
Yeah, so it's like, all right. But again, they portrayed a very interesting but true event that was very subtly put in there, is that one of those men in the boxcar actually had his hearing injured because the roar of the lion was so loud.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually kind of did that in the movie, and it was a neat scene when I first saw it, when I read the book and found out, and later on through other readings and everything, found out that yes, that really did happen that way. I was like, wow, that was really cool. Somebody did their homework. I was amazed by that.
Yeah, the other piece was some of the tree climbing and the hanging out in the trees and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I thought those were very well done in that they captured sort of what was in the book about him sitting the watch in the trees, and I think there was a point where the lion chased him up the tree. In fact, going back to the humor of the day, his boy, and I say that in the sense of the word that was used in that time, his valet, his manservant, was following behind him, and he had gotten cornered by the lion, and he had to climb the tree, and he fell down, and for some reason the lion got distracted and went a different way or whatnot, and he survived. But he said in the book he laughed until his sides hurt, and it was mostly because his guy almost died because he fell out of a tree. That wasn't why he was laughing. He was laughing because it was funny that he fell out of the tree, and and he was so scared and everything. And he was an amalgam of, or not an amalgam, I think he was the inspiration for the Samuel character that we haven't spoken of yet. The one that didn't like lions in the first place.
Yeah, I like that character.
I liked him. He was witty and wise and an exact personification of the, I don't know if this is the right use of the word, but gentrified native who has come to respect the white man and their ways and just sort of like, yeah, you know what? I kind of figured I can't stop progress. I might as well interact with him and make the best of it.
I'll roll with it.
Because he really did. I mean, aside from having 4 wives, which, I mean, 1 is hard enough. That was a joke, if my wife is listening. But, at the very least, it's an interesting, if not tropified, take on the character. Tropified. Is that a word? I think I just made it a word.
It is now.
But, yeah, I could have done without the wife character as well. I know that's a weird shift in topic, but there was no reason for her to exist aside from giving Michael Douglas an opportunity to say, hold your son high, and so he could do it at the end of the movie. So he could say that, I have learned from my mentor, Michael Douglas, and I have held my son high in the African land.
Again, you talk about characters that didn't need to be there, and again, I feel I have to say, this is still a Hollywood movie, and you're talking to American audiences, and even though this really did happen, Africa is still kind of an alien world to most Americans.
Oh, yeah. It's hot, like Africa hot.
It might as well be Jupiter for a lot of Americans. They have absolutely no clue what Africa is like and what constitutes African people. And that being said, if you're telling a story that happens in Africa, they're like, why should I care about this movie? But you give a character a wife and child to think about while he's in this alien world, and there's your connection. It's relatable.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing, is it's relatable.
Would I have done that if I was not under the thumb of Hollywood executives? Probably not. But I get it. To me, it wasn't so horrible that I was like, it ruined the movie for me. It was to me, I relegated it to the background. I liked Patterson regardless of whether or not he was married. So my biggest criticism with this movie is they could have fleshed out his character more. And they could have done that by putting Michael Douglas's characteristics back into the character and then just having the supporting cast to do what it was he needed to do to
shoot the lions. I think that was a tremendous disservice to the source material, and that kind of put the movie in a different light for me, because I remember seeing the trailers for this movie and thinking, oh, okay, cool, maybe I'll see it, maybe I won't. And then I saw it, again, like most of the movies that I have ever seen. I saw it on deployment, and it was kind of one of those, I saw part of it, some stuff happened, I came back and saw the rest of it, and then I saw the middle part. So I saw it in pieces and hadn't really put them all together front to back. Seeing this movie, I think, honestly, for the first time from pointy end to flat end, kind of made me look at it differently. And having never read the original book, I gotta say, I agree with you. I probably should have watched the movie and then read the book, because I think I would have enjoyed the movie a little bit more, but I didn't. So,
Que sera. That's what.
Yeah,
it is what
yeah.
it is.
I cannot change the past, but I can learn from it. You had said earlier that the book is usually better than the movie, or I think you alluded to it. You didn't actually say those words.
A little more detailed.
I'll tell you, I love the Lord of the Rings movies. I have tried reading the books, and I just can't do it, because Tolkien invests so much time in telling me about the 4,700 blades of grass that are in the strip in the middle of the road that has been crushed down by the weight of many wagons and ponies and goods and services, and an army of orcs has trod upon this ground 1,000 years ago, and now I must know the history of every molecule
and
of
then
dirt.
King Arthur interrupts and says, "Brother, may not just
just skip a bit, brother. Skip a bit." Yes. So, that's not always the case, but I think it's a rare occasion where the book is not better than the movie, or at least based on my opinion.
Yeah, you're probably going to get a lot of angry viewer mail from that one.
I hope we get mail. I'm really excited about getting. We might get a post office box just to get snail mail.
Yeah, that'd be cool. But it's funny. It's like that. Not to go off on too much, but just to say, just a tangent of what we're talking about. Again, you kind of said it's like whether or not I enjoy a book more or better than a movie. I mean, again, following my pattern of seeing the movie first and then reading the book, I've got to like the movie first if I'm compelled to read the book.
I will agree with you there.
If I don't like the movie, then I'm not reading the book.
I will not read the novelization. And that's the difference with this is not a novelization of the movie. The book was written in the early 1900s, 1910 or something like that. So, this is an old book. And that's one of the things that I actually did want to talk about a little bit, was the language of the book is of its time. So you sort of have to hearken back to some of the older terms for things. There were no, at least not that I know of, racial epithets, because the word coolie is used. That might be a slur now. I think it's not a term that we use in general.
If more people knew the context of it, it would be a pretty bad slur. But it's such an archaic word that it rarely gets used. And if somebody were to use it, it would confuse more people than it would offend. Until you explain to them what it meant.
They'd be like, what are you talking about?
You explain to them what it means, then, oh, yeah, no, don't use that word.
According to the internets, a coolie is an unskilled native laborer in India, China, and some other Asian countries. And it's a noun, it's dated, as you said, it's archaic, but it is labeled as offensive.
The funny thing is that the very fact that we're having this discussion and saying that the movie The Ghost in the Darkness didn't use the language that was very prevalent in the book is also showing that the movie is a product of its own time. And that, we felt that, oh yeah, this is historical, but we're not going to use that language, because if you go back 20 years or so before, not quite 30 years before this movie was made, if you've ever seen the movie The Sand Pebbles with Steve McQueen, about a Navy gunboat in China during the Boxer Rebellion, the word coolie is used quite liberally in that movie. It's not like they were trying to be offensive or anything. It's just, again...
That was the term at the time.
That was the term that was being portrayed, being made in a time where it was like, hey, we can say it, no problem.
Yeah, but the use of the word is appropriate to the setting, and I'll be honest, it doesn't bother me so much when you're putting it in a period piece, because that's the way people spoke then, and it lends more authenticity. I can appreciate avoiding it for the sake of not putting more drama into a movie than is already there. It didn't really bother me that it wasn't in the movie. It was interesting reading in the book, and as I said, to be honest, I didn't realize that it was derogatory. I mean, I did, but I didn't, if you catch what I'm saying. I mean, there's a little minor difference in. There's an Urban Dictionary entry for Coolie, and it references more Caribbean people as opposed to people from Southeast Asia and India, which is sort of Southeast Asia, but not like South Asia. Oh, it's originated from the Hindi word for baggage carrier. Who knew?
Oh, well, there you go. Learning something new. So speaking of learning, that was the other thing that I learned from this movie. That you could actually go to Chicago and actually see these lions.
Yeah, that the natural
Field Museum.
There we go. Yeah.
The Field Museum in Chicago. And I was like, I haven't seen it myself, but I have family members and whatnot who have.
Cool.
And, they say it's pretty cool to look at that and know that, that whole movie and that whole event was an actual thing, and these were the perpetrators.
Yeah, dirty, filthy lions. They look different. I mean, they don't. They're maneless lions. There were illustrations, not even illustrations. There were photographs because, again, something that they removed from the book. Colonel Patterson was a big amateur photographer, and he would take photos of all sorts of things. So there were photos, and I got the ebook, and it didn't have the photos in it, so I didn't go research them online, which I should have. But as I understand it, They were maneless lions, which is a little different than what most people think of when they think of lions. And the lions in the movie were maned lions.
Your conventional.
Yeah, just like, this is a lion, this is Simba.
Yeah, I don't know why they did that. Like I said, Nick Hodges from History Buffs kind of talked about that too, but he kind of viewed it as just a technicality that, maybe they didn't have any unmaned lions available for filming.
I don't think it was that. I think it was more, this is what people associate with lion. So it just makes it easier for the audience to go, oh, that's a lion, or Simba.
Yeah.
Which, and again, going back to the language, because I really got a kick out of this, every time that they would yell Simba, I would think of the Lion King, and the fact that, Mufasa named his lion son Lion is like calling the dog dog and calling, the cat. Like, good job, you named your son Lion, and he's a lion. It's like generic, lion labeling. You just got out the label gun and stuck an embossed label on him, Lion.
Well, was that movie Dragonheart with Randy Quaid?
Mm-hmm.
And he says,
and Sean Connery.
And Sean Connery as the dragon, and it's like, oh, it's like, what's your name? You couldn't pronounce it. Oh, I'll just call you Draco, which means dragon. And he's so basically, you're just calling me dragon.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, I am.
Yes, I am. Now let's move on.
Moving on. So, yeah, if you've ever seen... Oh, what?
No, I was going to say, still staying on the language piece, the foreman of the workers was called the Jemadar, or I'm not sure if I'm putting the appropriate emphasis on the appropriate syllable, but it made me think immediately of the Jem'Hadar race in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and made me wonder if that was where they drew the inspiration for the name, even though the characters didn't really fit the model of what a Jem'Hadar was. They weren't foremen, they were actually the warriors of the aliens from the Gamma Quadrant, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, they were the working masses, not the foremen.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the Vorta were the foremen.
Yeah, but it was interesting, and it made me think about how we introduce historical words and things into science fiction, or into fiction in the first, science fiction in this case, because Deep Space Nine. I was in Israel, and I took a tour of Jerusalem, and we went to the Old City, we went to the Wailing Wall, and it was pretty cool. On the bus, as we were driving to the Old City, we passed by the Jaffa Gate. And I know this has nothing to do with the movie, it is a tangent, and I apologize, but the warrior race in Stargate SG-1, not the movie, which was good, but the series with Richard Dean Anderson and all that, the warrior race were called Jaffa, and I couldn't help but wonder, is that where they got that name too. And it makes me curious how many other historical references are in science fiction. I know Dune did a lot of references to Arab culture, some very deep Muslim influence in that book,
Yeah.
which I don't think a lot of people know. And it always amuses me when history sort of comes back to become the future. Anyway, back to The Ghost in the Darkness. Remember, The Ghost in the Darkness, specific articles. There'll be a quiz later.
If we're going to go back, talking about the lions, as to why they used conventional maned lions, I have one little theory. I'm looking at the pictures of them. Some of them from Patterson's book, a couple of them from their exhibit in the Field Museum. And I gotta say, they do look kind of mangy. You look at them and they don't have the appearance of a fierce lion. I think that if they'd have portrayed the lions accurately, it's almost like, what, behind the rabbit? No, it is the rabbit. And I'm like, oh man, that really? But dude, don't attack him. That rabbit's dynamite. And even though we could see what the rabbit was able to do, he took out how many knights, and yet it was still he's still a punchline. And I think that's probably we like to say looks aren't everything, but in this case, I'd have to say that that's probably the case. Is that looks were everything? Because these lions, you look at them at first glance, they don't.
Yeah, they don't look like much.
No. They don't.
Yeah.
You really have to know who and what they were to really get a sense of fear and dread from these things. But, you look at a fully maned lion, then, yeah, you see that threat.
It's kind of one of those, there's the cultural piece of the natives that were revering them as demons, or not revering. They were, afraid of them as though they were demons. When people with gunpowder and gunpowder showed up and shot a thing from 500 yards away, it was magic. And as any sufficiently high level of technology is, so when someone shows up and they have the guns and the thing that reaches out and touches someone from, that far away, it's magic, which means that these people believe in magic and the gods and spirits, and they feared these lions as though they were devils. Which is why they ultimately left. It wasn't so much... Well, it was partly because they were afraid of being eaten, but it was also because they were firmly convinced that these devils couldn't be killed, at least not by conventional means.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is an interesting story. To our listeners, I highly encourage perusing the book. Even if you only read the first section about the man-eaters of Tsavo, it's definitely worth the $2.99 that I paid for the ebook.
Yeah, I was very fortunate enough that I had a friend who had a copy that I was able to borrow it the first time I read it. So
I didn't mind buying it. Again, I think going back to sort of our introduction episode where I talked about, having a tactile thing, I do appreciate that, and I wouldn't actually mind picking up the book for the illustrations and going through and maybe reading the captions and sort of understanding a little bit more about the history and that sort of thing. But I didn't mind having, doing a quick download on the ebook. It's sort of like streaming, but now I have it and it's mine, and it's a copy that I can lend digitally to people. So, that's a neat functionality that is totally not related to this movie, but it does have to do with the book. So it was interesting. One of the other interesting things is at the end of the book, there's an afterword where Colonel Patterson goes through and tells, basically, it's a how-to guide for how to put together a safari in Africa, how much the stewards are going to cost you, how much all the beaters are going to cost you, and all that kind of stuff. So you can save 20 rupees on your jemadar, your head person, if you go to Nairobi instead of picking them up in Mombasa. And it was really interesting to hear him talk about the different cities in Africa. I mean, I've been to Africa, but I've been to the Mediterranean coast and the northern part of Africa, Atlantic coast, Morocco, Algiers, Tunisia. I've never been to what people traditionally think of as Africa, with the jungle and the lions and all that kind of stuff. So it was intriguing to see that. I don't know if this movie was filmed on location or not, if that's true, that would have been some serious authenticity. Whatever the scenes were, wherever the locations were, they were they were filmed in Africa. They were pretty awe-inspiring, and that is nice to see, and I do like the beauty of the landscape.
Not just the location too, but I mean the soundtrack was incredible. I think too. It's just one of those things that this movie deserved a whole lot more credit than it actually got.
That happens sometimes.
Yeah, I think a very unappreciated movie.
When you say unappreciated, the budget was about $55 million, and it grossed about $38 million. So it was unappreciated to the tune of $17 million.
Yeah, again, for its time, but I mean, you talk to people and you say, hey, you ever heard of Ghost in the Darkness? Majority of people, I think, do not remember the movie. When you talk about movies, like you go to YouTube and you talk about, the greatest movies of such and such a time, very rarely do I ever see Ghost in the Darkness even come up on any of those lists.
Yeah, I wonder why that is.
So when I say unappreciated, that's what I mean.
Oh, I know. I was just kidding because I happened to run across the box office numbers.
Yeah.
Again, going to my own personal tastes, I don't necessarily judge a movie by its box office numbers, because I've seen some movies that I care for a great deal that bombed at the box office.
Yeah, and at the same time, Pearl Harbor made how much money?
Well, it was Pearl Harbor. I got nothing.
Yeah.
I can't. I have no idea why that movie made so much money.
Yeah.
It was visually stunning,
No.
I will admit. But the that and well, we'll talk about that later when we actually, because I own the movie and we'll get to it. Do you own the movie?
I
Never
do
actually
not.
confirmed.
I do not.
Ah.
I have Tora.
Well, you'll have to sit through it again. Interesting point of note: when I was stationed in Long Beach, before the naval station up there closed, they had the models that were used in Tora 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 on the base in a little fenced-in area that, as you were going out to some of the more remote piers, you had to drive right by them, and they were just sitting there. I doubt that they're still there, but it was a pretty neat thing. Like, hey, those are the Tora 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 models.
Nice.
So that was pretty cool.
So.
But getting back to this movie, Trains.
Yeah, we're kind of all over the place on this one, I gotta say. But another point I was gonna make, and I remember I just kind of let you talk about a certain portion of the movie, but you were talking about Patterson always trying to anticipate where the Lions would be next. And one thing that this movie did very well was actually portray how difficult of a job that was for Patterson. One of the two aspects, and Nick Hodges talks about this in History Buffs, one of the problems was that, one, these lions didn't seem to act like regular lions. They almost seemed to work out certain issues.
They were the demons.
They went around the bomas, the big thorny bushes. And the other problem that they had is that they didn't have enough guns to go around. Patterson and whoever he happened to be hunting with were the only ones with the guns. And they tried to anticipate lions would be at one side of the camp and they'd attack entirely on the other side. And I think the movie did a pretty decent job of showing that, because they always, every time there was an attack, they would always be running towards it. It never happened where they were.
I kind of agree with you. Not 100%. I think there's just enough disagreement in me to make this point. From a movie-making standpoint, it heightens the tension to have them running to where the lions are. As to whether or not they showed well enough, again, for me, that they were in the wrong spot, was the feeling that you didn't have time passing. And again, I know we only have 2 hours to tell the story, I get it, but the death count just was like, oh, crap, 182 people just died. Oh, you just had breakfast. Well, the lions were hungry. And I'm being a little facetious.
Yeah, I'm about to say, I don't think there was ever a scene like that. I don't think. I mean, there was the scenes where Patterson would be in the thing he built, the scaffolding he built. He'd be up there waiting the night or in the tree, and then he'd come down later on, and it's like, what happened? It's like another lion attack, and it's like, I was over here, what happened? And it's like, it was all the way on the other side of the camp. There was that. The scene with the hospital where they made it irresistible, and he still attacked the new place.
Yeah, well, they're smart lions.
Exactly, and that's the point that...
Okay, so, and again, I do agree with you that they had the sense of there being different spots that they were in, but it just seemed like they should have stretched out the time just a little bit more to make it feel like this had been going on for the months that it actually went on for in the book.
Maybe, yeah.
That was one of my biggest complaints about this movie. It kind of felt like they woke up one morning and then they went to sleep, and it was a fortnight later, and it was kind of like reading the book and going 2 weeks later, like, whoa, nothing happened in between. No, not even so much as nothing happened for 2 weeks. If that's the case, then tell me. It's been 2 weeks since the last attack. Maybe they've moved on, because in the movie, or rather in the book, they started out at a spot and the lions followed them as they moved their camp from place to place. As they moved up the railroad, because they started building the railroad, they weren't just at the bridge. And I think that would have made for a much more dramatic display of time passing, rather than just showing, like, oh, look, the bridge is a little more done now. Because, and again, I maybe didn't want to see it, but when he visualized the bridge being done in his head, I was like, oh, the bridge, yay, whatever. It was too fast. I mean, maybe just showing the date on the bottom to give you that feeling that time has passed.
Yeah.
Maybe growing some, well, no, the facial hair wouldn't really go with the time period, especially of a British subject.
Well, I don't know. It's like, you spend that much time in Africa, you start, you start getting the attitude, hey, when in Rome,
Yeah, you start going native.
Yeah. But I don't know. I personally think they did that quite well, because I mean, it comes in, all you arrived at was a ditch, and then as time went by, you start to see, oh look, there's the stanchions, or whatever the part of the bridge that's called, and they're already putting the steel girders. The bridge is halfway done. To me, that's a nice portrayal of passage of time.
Yeah, I think they could have done it a little bit better. And again, I think we spent a lot more time discussing time than it probably deserved. But I'm gonna talk about one more pet peeve that I have about movies that show people holding rifles, because I have, in my naval career, I've gone through a couple of courses that are designed to teach you weapons control and proper aiming techniques and that sort of thing. And one of the things that drives me insane, movies, and this one in particular, with people who are supposed to be experienced at brandishing a long gun. Pistol, fine, we'll work on that. That's great. But if you are an experienced person at holding a rifle, you will find that you have much better control over your aim of the rifle with your elbow tucked into your side as opposed to out like a chicken wing. You lose a lot of lateral control and you're aiming all over the place. And for experienced hunters, in the movie they sort of portray Val Kilmer's character as not the most experienced hunter. He's got some experience. But even Michael Douglas's character, who is supposed to be the most proficient hunter on the continent, even he's got his chicken wing out and aiming appropriately and shooting whatever he wants to. So that drives me nuts. I don't usually pick on things that I know about, like watching room entries and all that kind of stuff on police dramas. But that is one thing that does drive me insane. Like, come on. Get somebody who knows how to shoot a rifle and just correct that. Just bring it down. And maybe it's because in the courses that I went to, I got trained, if you will. I got counseled to bring that arm in to maintain positive control. Maybe that's why it's such a big deal for me. Again, there are other things that don't bother me in the slightest because there's more than one way to skin a cat. But, see, cat, lion, skin. Anyway. That drove me nuts in this movie, so. Okay,
well, again, I'm not going to play the movie right off the bat, but, the few pictures that I'm looking at, just for Ghost in the Darkness, the couple pictures that actually show them, Val Kilmer's doing that thing where his elbow's out, but Michael Douglas's character, his elbow's down.
Really? Well, I know when I saw it, I caught it, so... And it happened a number of times. So maybe they just got the one time that it didn't.
Maybe, yeah. But I hear what you're saying. Yeah, I totally get that. The little details, again, that really get to us.
Well, it's like watching movies about the Navy and going, oh, that would never happen. I know when I go into a movie that has Navy in it that a lot of times they're going to get something wrong. So I just throw the willful suspension of disbelief out there and I push the button and I just roll with it. But there are some things that, like I said, are just pet peeves that make me insane.
Yeah. So, in closing remarks, I mean,
are we there?
I don't know. I mean, I think we've talked about so much already.
Yeah. The I don't know. I mean, I'm sure 20 minutes later I'll think of something. So that really does seem to be the case.
Yeah. Because I'm kind of like my brain is kind of thinking, it's like, yeah, what can you talk about with this movie more that you haven't already talked about?
Yeah, I think again, in much the same ways they could have stretched out the time, we have probably come to a logical conclusion, at least as far as I can think.
Because as great as this movie was, it was pretty straightforward. There wasn't a whole lot of underneath type of thing. It's not like Star Wars. What did this mean? Hey, who is Val Kilmer's real parents? You know, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. There wasn't a lot of underlying themes. It was like guy goes to Africa, guy
deals with
shoots
lions, and we're done.
Yeah, exactly.
Builds a railroad.
No tigers, no bears, but yeah, builds a railroad. Yep.
Yeah, the lions family aren't going to come back for revenge or anything.
Well, I hope not.
Well, if they were, they're taking their time.
Yeah, and they would take pride in it too.
Why?
That was sorry.
All right.
Anyway, so closing thoughts you sort of alluded to or were there?
Yeah, like I said, this was a pretty straightforward movie. Very, very well done, I think, artistically and cinematically. I don't know what adjective you want to, or adverb you want to put in there. It's one of those movies that every now and again I like to revisit and just take it off the shelf, throw it in the player, and just sit back and relax and watch it.
Okay. I don't think I'm going to be going out of my way to get this. The scenery, the cinematography, the landscape was beautiful. The costumes, as you had already said, based on the History Buff post, again, from what I know of the era, were pretty accurate. The characters that were not Val Kilmer and Michael Douglas were great. I mean, again, as far as what was in the movie and what they or rather what was in the book and what they actually showed or discussed of those characters and the way they merged some together and took some away. I think, and I already said it, we could have done away with Michael Douglas, just made that one character and given a little bit more time to explore the terror that these lions were causing a little bit more than just, nope, all the workers want to leave now. No, don't leave. We've got a bridge to build. I'll kill the lions. Okay, we'll stay. I think there could have been some better choices for telling of the story, even though the other parts of the movie were really good. The music was good. I wouldn't say it was fantastic, but it was good. The realism of the building of the bridge, at least again in my mind, what it would look like since I wasn't there. I didn't care for the two main characters and the changes from the book. So, yeah, there you go.
Okay.
I was going to ask where this would belong in your shelf, but because I already jumped in at the beginning when I said I don't own this, and in my closing remarks I already said that I'm not going to own this. If I did, it was a fair enough movie. I would put it probably in the middle as far as, quality of film. I'm just not going to go out of my way to get it.
Okay.
Where does it belong on your shelf?
Well, here's the plot twist. As much as I love this movie, it still occupies general population.
You have a very strange categorization of general population.
Yeah, I think though the one of the main reasons why this only occupies general population is because the edition that I have is a very standard edition. Not a whole lot of special features. I think this movie deserves a lot of behind the scenes looks and maybe like a documentary that go alongside.
Discussing the actual man-eaters of Tsavo.
Exactly, and you don't exactly have that with this DVD edition. Let's see, a widescreen version, and that's it. It has a theatrical trailer.
Yay!
Whoopie-doo. So yeah, I think some documentaries, some behind the scenes. This did win an Oscar for best sound editing, I think it was, or sound effects.
Oh, okay.
I think it deserves a better edition than what I've got. If they do come out with a special edition someday because it's a historical movie, or a movie of historical value, then yeah, it'll probably occupy a higher point on my shelf. But for the time being, that's what I got, and that's where it is.
All right. Sweet.
Yeah.
What time is it? It's time to push the button?
It is time to push the button.
All right, let's see what we're doing next. Okay, ready? Here we go.
Robots.
Ooh, robots.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. I don't own that one,
That's
but we'll make something happen.
Have you seen it?
Oh yeah, that's the one. That's the one with Robin Williams.
That's Ewan McGregor and Mel Brooks and...
Yeah, Robin Williams was one of the voices.
Was he? Yeah, you're right. I forgot about that. Well, there you go then. He didn't receive top billing, so we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, that was great in this trailer where he's in that thing, and it's like, oh, there's this part with this big hammer. Oh, look, they brought it back.
Yeah. Ooh, hey, look. But yep. So robots.
All right.
Well, that'll be fun.
Yeah, fun movie.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. So I previewed where you can contact us earlier by discussing our Facebook page, and again, I do want to reiterate: go check out the conversation between Dan, myself, and listener Jeff Edwards regarding the movie Seven, and consider it a preview for when we do eventually get to that. Also, you can comment on our Podbean page, and you can leave us 5-star reviews, yay, on iTunes and Google Play. I think they have a reviewing system as well. I don't have an Android, sorry. But yeah, and we're on the YouTubes and anywhere else that you can find podcasts. You could probably find us there. So share us with your friends and leave some feedback, because we would love that. Thanks for listening. We really do appreciate it. And we'll see you in 2 weeks with robots. Dan?
Oh, this one really doesn't have an opportunity for.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, unless if you want to channel South Park, here we have a gay lion. Roar.
Nice. All right. Thanks again. 2 weeks.